The car was a black Lincoln Navigator, spotless, polished, the kind of vehicle that turned heads at intersections. And that was exactly the problem. It was a Tuesday morning in late October, the kind of grey, biting Canadian morning where the air smells like cold pavement and dead leaves. When Master Warrant Officer Theophilus Asante pulled into the parking lot of Hargrove and Bellingham, one of the most prestigious jewellery stores in downtown Ottawa. He was 61 years old, retired from the Canadian Armed Forces after 34 years of service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Bosnia, and more hours spent in the kind of darkness that civilians never see and could never fully understand. He had survived things that would hollow out most people. He walked with the particular stillness of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone. His wife, Constance Asante, was beside him, 60 years old, a former nursing officer herself, a woman who had spent 2 decades serving on bases from Petawawa to Valcartier, who had held the hands of young soldiers in field hospitals while their blood soaked through bandages, who had learned how to deliver terrible news with grace and without flinching. She wore a deep burgundy coat and a cream scarf. She was dressed, as she always was when they came into the city, with quiet elegance. They were there to buy a gift. Their daughter, Renee Asante Oduya, was being promoted the following Saturday. She was about to become one of the youngest lieutenant colonels in the history of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Theophilus and Constance had talked about this day for months. They had decided they wanted to give her something real, something that would last. A gold chain, perhaps, or a watch, something she could pass down one day. The Navigator, incidentally, belonged to Renee. She had lent it to them for the week, while her own car was being serviced. It was registered in her name. Everything about it was legitimate, documented, clean. None of that would matter for the next 2 hours. The trouble started before they even reached the front door. A man in a dark jacket, a private security contractor named Ellis Ford, mid-30s, the kind of man who carried his authority in his chest and his assumptions in his eyes, intercepted them at the entrance. He didn't say good morning. He didn't step aside. He positioned himself in the doorway, arms half crossed, and looked at Theophilus the way some people look at weather they don't like. "Can I help you?" he said. It wasn't really a question. Theophilus looked at him calmly. "We're here to browse, perhaps make a purchase." Ford's eyes moved to the Lincoln in the parking lot, then back. "That your vehicle?" "It belongs to our daughter." Something shifted behind Ford's expression. It was barely visible, a slight tightening around the jaw, a recalibration. But Constance saw it. She had spent enough years reading people in high-stress environments to know exactly what it meant. He had already decided something. He was just assembling justifications. "I'm going to need to see some identification," Ford had said. Theophilus looked at the door, then at the man blocking it. He had been asked for identification when entering a retail establishment exactly once before in his life. And that time too, he had been standing on a sidewalk in Ottawa. He reached into his coat and produced his wallet. He handed over his driver's license without a word. Ford examined it with theatrical care. Then he looked up. "And the registration for the vehicle? We're not applying for a loan," Constance said, keeping her voice even. "We're trying to buy jewellery. It's store policy," Ford said. "We've had some issues in this area recently with..." He stopped, chose his next word with the careful dishonesty of someone who knows exactly what he means and exactly why he can't say it. "Incidents." Theophilus said nothing. He did not step forward. He stood exactly where he was and let the silence sit between them like a courtroom exhibit. Eventually, Ford stepped aside just barely, and they entered. Inside, the store gleamed. Glass cases stretched the length of the room, lit from below, filled with rings and pendants and watches. A young saleswoman near the back, Cassidy Theoret, 25, new to the job and already uncomfortable, watched them walk in and made eye contact with Theophilus, long enough to offer a small, uncertain smile before looking away. Another staff member, a man named Gordon Hebb, the floor manager, appeared almost immediately. Hebb was somewhere in his late 40s, greying at the temples, with the professionally warm expression of a man who had learned customer service, the way some people learn a second language. Technically correct, but somehow slightly off. He greeted them pleasantly enough, asked what they were looking for, listened as Constance explained about their daughter's promotion, and then his eyes moved to Ford, standing near the door. Something passed between them. A look. It lasted less than a second. What happened next unfolded slowly, The way bad things often do, not in a single terrible moment, but in accumulations of small, grinding indignities. Heb began following them, not assisting, following, hovering just behind their left shoulders, repositioning every time they moved to a different case, picking up items they had just set down and returning them to their exact spots, as if their fingerprints might contaminate something. He answered Constance's questions with clipped half-answers, and then watched her hands while she looked at the pieces she was asking about. "May I see this one?" Constance asked, pointing to a gold chain in the second case. Heb hesitated. "That one is quite." He paused. "What's your budget, if you don't mind my asking?" Constance looked at him. "I ask because I want to make sure I direct you to the right pieces," Heb said, smiling with all his teeth. "Our budget," Constance said quietly, "is not your concern. I asked to see the chain." He showed it to her, but he did not let go of it entirely. He held one end while she examined the other, his grip gentle but persistent, like a man who has already decided he won't be letting go. Meanwhile, Ford had moved inside. He was on his phone now, typing something. Theophilus watched this. He had been in enough theatres of operation to understand information flows. Someone was being contacted. A decision was being made in another room. 4 minutes later, 2 officers from the Ottawa Police Service walked through the front door. Constable Adrian Pelletier and Constable Donna Shkutak. Pelletier young, chest out, scanning the room with the energy of a man looking for a reason. Shkutak a few years older, quieter, already reading the room with eyes that told a slightly different story. Something careful, something not entirely comfortable. Heb greeted them near the entrance and spoke in a low voice, his back turned to the Asantes. Theophilus could not hear the exact words. He didn't need to. He had seen this configuration before. The shape of it was familiar. It was the shape of an allegation being assembled. Pelletier approached them. "Sir, ma'am, I need you both to step outside with me for a moment." "We're shopping," Theophilus said. "We've received a report of a suspicious vehicle in the lot. It belongs to our daughter," Constance said. "Registered to her. We can show you the insurance documents. I'm going to need you both to come outside." The word need, the Theos used, not ask. They went outside. The cold hit them immediately. Constance pulled her scarf tighter. Pelletier asked them to stand near the navigator while he called in the plate. There was nothing wrong with the plate. There had never been anything wrong with the plate. The result came back clean inside of 90 seconds. And Pelletier looked at it, looked at his radio, then looked at them, with an expression that did not quite constitute an apology. "I still need to see ID from both of you," he said. "You've already run the plate," Theophilus said. "The vehicle is clean. We've committed no offence. On what grounds?" "It's standard." "It is not standard," Theophilus said. The same voice he had used for 34 years when delivering a point that was not open for interpretation. Calm, precise, absolute. "We walked into a retail store. We asked to look at jewellery. We were followed, monitored, interrogated about our budget, and now we are standing outside in the cold being asked to prove our right to exist in a shopping district. So I'll ask you again, on what grounds?" Pelletier's jaw tightened. Shkutak, 3 steps back, was very still. Her eyes moved between Pelletier and Theophilus, and something in her expression. It was hard to name exactly, but it was there. Looked like a person doing arithmetic they don't like the answer to. Constance had her phone out now. She had begun recording 2 minutes ago, from the moment they stepped outside. She had not made a show of it. She had simply lifted the phone and let it run. "I'm going to ask you to put that away," Pelletier said. "You can ask," Constance said pleasantly. "I'm in a public space and I'm not obstructing anything. It stays." The standoff had a particular texture, the cold, the grey sky, the sound of traffic on Elgin Street, the slight vibration of Pelletier's authority, meeting something it had not fully accounted for. And then the call came in. Not Theophilus's call, not Constance's call, Renee's. She had been tracking the navigator on her phone, force of habit from a decade of logistics and operational planning. She had seen it parked in the Hargrove and Bellingham lot for an unusual length of time. She had tried her mother's cell phone, no answer. She had tried her father's, no answer. She had called the store's main line, and someone had picked up and said, carefully, that there was a situation being handled. Lieutenant Colonel Renee Asante Oduya had driven from Uplands to downtown Ottawa in under 18 minutes. She was still in partial uniform. She stepped out of the cab she'd taken when she couldn't find parking and walked across the lot with the kind of stride that does not invite questions. She was 40 years old. She was built like both her parents, her father's composure, her mother's directness. She wore the rank insignia of a lieutenant colonel on her shoulders and the expression of a woman who has coordinated emergencies responses across 3 time zones and is not remotely intimidated by a parking lot. She walked directly to Constable Pelletier. "Lieutenant Colonel René Asante Oduya, Royal Canadian Air Force," she said. "These are my parents. That is my vehicle. Can you tell me what is happening here?" The silence that followed had weight. Pelletier looked at her uniform, looked at her rank, looked back at the store, where Heb had appeared in the window and was watching. Skutak had a notebook out now. She had been writing for the last several minutes. This, Theophilus noted, was no small thing. Renee did not raise her voice. She did not perform outrage. She asked questions in the precise, sequential manner of someone trained to document and escalate through proper channels. And every question was a door that led to a smaller, less defensible room. When did the store contact police? What specific behavior triggered the call? Had the vehicle been reported stolen? Had either individual been observed committing or attempting to commit any offense? What was the legal basis for detaining 2 individuals who had been cooperative, produced identification, and against whom no evidence of wrongdoing existed? Pelletier answered some questions, couldn't answer others. By the 3rd question, he couldn't answer. Skutak had stopped writing entirely and was looking at him. Inside the store, something was also shifting. Cassidy Théoret, the young saleswoman who had smiled at Constance when they walked in, had been watching everything through the front window. She had at some point in the last 20 minutes taken out her own phone. She had also at some point sent a message to her sister, who ran a fairly well-followed community account on social media and had a particular interest in civil rights documentation in the capital. She had also, as would emerge later, quietly mentioned to her manager that she thought the situation had gone somewhere she wasn't comfortable with, and Heb had told her to go back to her section. She hadn't gone back to her section. What followed, in the days after, not in the parking lot, unfolded in the way that accountability sometimes does in Canada, slowly, through channels, without drama, but with consequences that were real and lasting. The Ottawa Police Service opened an internal review. Constable Skutak's notes were submitted as part of the file. Her account of the interaction was detailed, precise, and did not reflect well on the initial decision-making. Pelletier was referred for retraining. The review board's language was careful, institutional, and said in 10 measured paragraphs what most people could have said in 1 sentence. Ellis Ford's security contract with Hargrove and Bellingham was not renewed. The official statement from the parent company cited a review of operational practices and alignment with our commitment to inclusive service standards. What it did not cite, but what the internal communications would later show in response to a formal complaint, was that Fordo had sent a text message to Heb 9 seconds after the Asantes entered the parking lot. The message said, "Heads up, couple in the lot, black, driving a Lincoln, doesn't fit." That message became part of the complaint file. Gordon Heb resigned before the formal investigation concluded. The store issued an apology, the careful, legal-adjacent kind that says everything and commits to nothing. It acknowledged that the Asantes' experience had fallen below the standard of service and dignity that all customers deserved. It expressed regret. The Asantes did not accept the apology. They acknowledged receiving it. Renee, through a lawyer, filed a formal complaint under the Canadian Human Rights Act. The process was long. It was not, she said in a brief statement to a journalist from the Ottawa Citizen, designed to be easy. It was designed to be real. Constance's video, 22 minutes of footage, steady and undramatic, simply showing what had happened, was submitted as evidence. In it, you could hear the cold in the air, you could hear traffic, you could hear Theophilus's voice, measured and immovable, asking questions that no one could answer, and you could hear, in the background near the end, the exact moment Renee arrived, because the energy in the recording changed. The cold didn't, the grey sky didn't, but something did. As for the gift, the reason they had come to Hargrove and Bellingham on a grey Tuesday morning in October, they never bought it there. The following weekend, the Saturday of Renee's promotion ceremony at Arcah Station, Uplands, Theophilus presented his daughter with a gold chain that Constance had found at a small family jeweller in the Glebe, run by a Ghanaian-Canadian couple who had been in business for 22 years. The chain was simple and solid and exactly right. Theophilus clasped it around René's neck after the pinning ceremony, his hands steady, his eyes clear. He did not make a speech. He never had been much for speeches. He just looked at his daughter, Lieutenant Colonel René Asante Oduya, 40 years old, decorated, remarkable, and nodded once. She understood. Some people walk through this world assuming doors will open for them. They have never had to consider, not even for a moment, what it might mean to be standing outside a door you have every right to enter, in the cold, being asked to justify yourself to someone who has already decided what you are. Theophilus and Constance Asante had built their lives in service of a country that did not always extend to them the same dignity they extended to it. They had done so without bitterness, without retreat, without ever letting it make them smaller. They were not small people, and no parking lot, no store policy, no security guard with a phone and an assumption was ever going to make them so. If you've ever stood in a place where you knew you belonged and been made to feel like you didn't, this story is for you. Leave a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that dignity doesn't come with conditions, that justice doesn't arrive only when someone powerful enough finally shows up, then you already know what Voices of Courage is about. We'll see you in the next one.